Yeah, welcome to Simply Bitcoin. The global liquidity index just broke out for the first time since mid-2020. The last time this happened, Bitcoin saw an explosive 600% rally. Is history repeating itself? Let's see. However, what's really interesting about this cycle was that Michael Saylor was really interesting about that previous cycle was that Michael Saylor was the only billionaire who enabled his public company to benefit from that liquidity injection. This time, there's more than 50 public companies who have already put Bitcoin on their balance sheet. Are we about to see a FOMO from the other 58,000 public companies following the Michael Saylor playbook, which has absolutely proven itself to be the best performing out of the entire S&P 500, including the big tech companies, including NVIDIA. People make fun of me because I mispronounced that, but Michael Saylor's Bitcoin strategy with MicroStrategy is even outperforming that. So are things going to get even more heated up? We'll show. We shall see. Anyways, I'm going to bring up my legendary co-host on stage with me today, Optimus. Let's get through some of the data. Anyways, let's pull it up. So here is a tweet from Marty Party, Global Liquidity Index. Here we go, kids. Banana Zone.
Can you zoom in, Nico? Can you zoom in a little bit?
Absolutely. Bottom exactly in the Bitcoin bottom, peaked exactly at the Bitcoin top. Look out for 2025. You know, one of the things that's really interesting to me, Opti, is like Satoshi, the way he timed the halvings were around the presidential election, and coincidentally, they've been around the liquidity, the global liquidity cycles. Is that a coincidence? Maybe, but I do find it quite interesting. So what happened last time we found ourselves in this position? Well, we tweeted this out from the Simply Bitcoin Twitter handle. And the last time we had a breakout in the global liquidity index that preceded the bull run of 2021, right? And you could see where, it kind of crossed over and we went down. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we just had a crossover for the first time a couple days ago. And could that send Bitcoin up to new heights? Now, the element that I want to introduce into today's episode is there is a different factor. And that different factor is that not only are institutions here like BlackRock, like Fidelity, but also Michael Saylor has proven on the public company level that his strategy is outperforming everything else. Here's a graphic that he put up. Stock performance since August 10th, 2020, when MicroStrategy adopted its Bitcoin strategy. The S&P is up 71%. Bitcoin is up 451%. That's pretty good. But MicroStrategy is up 1,325%. Just to kind of give you guys perspective, that's a 13x in 4 years. That's pretty effing good. Here he is on Legacy Media talking about it. And exactly, here's with I believe this anchor's name is Charles Payne. He asked Saylor about it. Let's check out what Saylor has to say.
MicroStrategy is just levering the most powerful idea in the world right now. Bitcoin's the solution to everybody's problem. Investors are worried about regulation, taxes, torts, and antitrust. Economists are worried about the deficit and the debt. Individuals want to deal with inflation, and they're worried about opportunity. Companies can't compete with megacorps. Those who understand Bitcoin buy Bitcoin. Those who don't criticize Bitcoin. With Bitcoin, individuals can outrun the inflation, investors can beat the market, corporations can outgrow the competition, and countries can revitalize their economies and boost their currencies by tapping into digital capital. MicroStrategy is just...
So again, beautifully articulated by Michael Saylor. The proof is in the pudding. This is the difference between previous cycle, going back to the global liquidity index. This is the difference between before 2021, before the bull market. This is the difference between right here. It wasn't a proven strategy back then. It wasn't. That Michael Saylor had a theory, but it wasn't proven. Now it's proven without a shadow of a doubt, and we haven't even entered the expected banana zone, the expected parabola. So, man, I think this is going to be absolute fireworks. I think it's going to be undeniable that public companies don't have the luxury but to not adopt Bitcoin, even if it's a small percentage, even if it's 1, 2, 3%, because if they don't do it, they're going to be at a competitive disadvantage to companies that do adopt a Bitcoin strategy. So I'm incredibly bullish for this upcoming 2025 bull run, which again, coincidentally lines up with the global liquidity index. Like, was that another coincidence by Satoshi? Just like the halving is the year of the presidential elections? Like, I don't know, but lots of coincidences, man. And there's lots of symbolism in Bitcoin itself. Like, whether it's the amount of blocks that happen between halvings, the amount of coins. There's a lot of symbolism. You can point out little things in how Bitcoin is structured that it points to the infamous 6102 order that happened in the 1930s. But yeah, man, it seems like the planets are aligning. But I think this cycle is tremendously different because of the ETFs, because of the institutional legitimization of Bitcoin due to Larry Fink and Howard Lupnick from Counter Fitzgerald. And of course, the proof is in the pudding with Michael Saylor's outperformance of everything in the S&P. And that sets up 2025 to be an explosive year for Bitcoin, which again, coincidentally lines up with the global liquidity index. So anyways, Opti, what's your take on this, bro? I'm really excited for 2025. I know it's a little bit speculative, man, but like, I think it could be quite explosive. I think it's going to surprise people. What's your take, brother?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I hate being the Bitcoiner that says this time is different, considering we say that every time a bull run comes, but this time really does. Hold on. My mic. I need to get a new stand over here. But this time really does feel different. Everything that has been built out from 2024 this year, and of course the builders out there in 2023 building out the products, and then in this year seeing the institutional adoption, or rather the institutional acceptance of Bitcoin. We've seen, Nayib Bukele put a country on a Bitcoin standard. So there's a lot of data points here showing me that I think this time really is different. And remember last time, the last bull run, we really didn't get the blow off top that we were all expecting. And we kind of got dampened on that last bull run. So we haven't really seen the retail FOMO that I think we should be seeing this time around. When I got into Bitcoin in 2017, that's basically why I got into it, is because of that retail FOMO blow off top. I know everyone's poorer at this time around in this cycle, considering inflation and all the crazy stuff going in the world, but it really does feel different. And so it is very interesting to see what I've been saying for a while, a perfect storm on the horizon. I think this 2025, or rather maybe the end of 2024, Q4, is going to be a very explosive time in the Bitcoin price. Of course, everyone that is a Bitcoiner, that's a savage Bitcoiner, is like, price is irrelevant and is the most boring aspect about Bitcoin. But I like to look at the price as a real-time metric of people's understanding of Bitcoin. And fundamentally, no one really understands Bitcoin, or rather most people don't understand Bitcoin. And now there's so much education, there's so many data points, whether it is Michael Saylor or whether it is the BlackRock ETF, the acceptance of institutional capital liking Bitcoin. It just goes to show that we are entering a new paradigm here in the Bitcoin history. It is a new epoch here. And I do think 2025 is going to be crazy. Do I think that all of this stuff doesn't correlate with the cycles? No, I still think it's the cycle theory playing out, but it is interesting that Satoshi's cycle is kind of aligned. Hold on. Excuse me, guys. I'm choking on my saliva over here. It is interesting that the 4-year cycle of Bitcoin does align up perfectly with the elections, with this global liquidity index. So I know a lot of us Bitcoiners think of Bitcoin being a risk-off asset, but it still is a baby in the grand scheme of things, and it's still going to align with a lot of things that go on in the world. And this is why I think we're going to see crazy amounts of pumping in regards to Bitcoin, because we all know the money printer is going to go on, and Bitcoin is the most liquid asset in the world. It's the most saleable money in the world. And therefore, I think that most people are starting to look at Bitcoin as something that they need in their portfolios. Obviously, they'll get to the point that we get here on Simply Bitcoin where we think it's the best money in the world. And obviously, the whole world is going to gravitate towards the best money in the world. But that signal is going to take a little while. You know, I've been in Bitcoin for 7, 8 years now, and I didn't get here overnight. It took a lot of time in the market to understand what's going on, and now it's as ubiquitous as the internet. It's like it's a part of everyday life, and it's my money. And I'm not going back to the fiat money. And I think most people, once they get through that door, will look at it the same way. And everyone has the problem. Like Saylor was saying, we all have the same problem. Our money is broken. The fiat system is running on fumes, and people are going to look for a better alternative. And there is no alternative to Bitcoin. It is the best money in the world. And this is why I think Bitcoin's going to win, and we're entering into a Bitcoin future.
I 100% agree with you, man. I think Bitcoin is definitely a one-way door. I've never met someone in my entire 8 years of doing this that said, you know, they transitioned to a Bitcoin standard and they're like, yeah, let me just go back to fiat. Fiat's great. I've never had that conversation before. Anyways, guys, you're tuned into Simply Bitcoin Live, the most watched daily Bitcoin only live show on YouTube, Rumble, X, Nostr, everywhere. If you guys are enjoying the show so far, make sure to smash that like button. We appreciate the zaps coming in on Nostr. And guys, again, stay tuned, because we're going to talk about some very interesting topics today in regards to the separation of money and state. We're going to talk about the information narrative trench warfare that's happening. We're going to talk about themes that we've talked about on Simply Bitcoin for a long time, which is the disintermediation of money and the disintermediation of information due to the internet. So you have lots of topics today to cover. And of course, Opti's going to cover some cultural events towards the end of the show, which is going to be quite exciting. Anyways, you want to do a quick little tidbit?
Yeah, well, TDR. Yeah, I mean, yesterday at the end of the show, it was kind of a doomer episode. And I remember at the beginning of the show, someone basically said, like, there's a war going on and you guys are talking about Bitcoin. And we kind of touch on the idea of fiat is the money of war. And this is why we're Bitcoiners. So I'm going to dive back down into that rabbit hole a little bit. And I know this is one of Nico's favorite topics as well. So yeah, I think this is going to be a less doomer show than yesterday, but who knows? We might get doomer.
Yeah, I mean, defund war, buy Bitcoin. That's what the separation of money and state is all about. Anyways, guys, before we jump into the show, I do want to give a very special shout out to Simply Bitcoin's lead sponsor, the best place to buy automatic self-custody Bitcoin. Buy real Bitcoin, enable your independence with the fastest and safest way to buy Bitcoin in Canada, in the USA. It's a completely non-custodial platform. What does that mean? That means that when you buy Bitcoin on Bitcoin Well, as soon as the funds clear, it goes straight to your self-custody Bitcoin wallet address. It doesn't even allow you to leave your Bitcoin on the platform, which perfectly aligns with the Simply Bitcoin ethos of the separation of money and state, because after all, self-custody is the revolution. Head over to bitcoinwell.com today to get started. The sign-up process takes literally like 2 to 5 minutes, and bada bing, bada boom, you're ready to buy Bitcoin. Also, when you buy Bitcoin on Bitcoin Well, you can earn Bitcoin Well points, and you can use those points towards the Bitcoin Wishing Well contest, which we'll do live for you guys right now. Get your Lightning wallets ready. First person to scan the QR code wins 500 sats. By the way, every time you toss a coin into the Bitcoin Wishing Well, you have an opportunity to win up to 1 million Satoshis. If you use promo code SimplyBTC to sign up to bitcoinwell.com today, you get 3 tosses into the Bitcoin Wishing Well absolutely free. All right, everybody, let's start the show. Let's hit the numbers. All right, everybody, before we talk about the numbers, I do want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Stamp Seed. Usually when you buy yourself a hardware wallet, it comes with a piece of paper. That paper is usually labeled 1 through 12 or 1 through 24. And you're meant to write down your seed words on that piece of paper. The problem is that paper is prone to fire damage, water damage. Your dog could potentially eat it. That's not the right way to store your generational wealth, which is why we recommend the stamp seed. The stamp seed is a titanium seed phrase storage kit, which comes with everything you need: the hammer, the letter stamping tools, the titanium plate to literally proof of work stamp your seed in the privacy of your home, letter by letter, into a plate of titanium so it could survive the test of time. This is the proper way to store your generational wealth. This titanium has been stress tested under a blowtorch. It's been dumped in salt water. Your dog's probably not going to eat a piece of titanium. This is going to stand the test of time. Head over to stampseed.com today. Use promo code SIMPLY to get 15% off anything on the store. Don't write down your seed words on piece of paper. Stamp them into titanium only with the stamp seed. All right, everybody, let's get to the numbers. At the time of recording, the Bitcoin price is $61,940. Sats per dollar, 1,614. Block height, 863,831. Realized monetary inflation, 1.33%. Market capitalization, 1.22 trillion. Market capital, Bitcoin versus gold market cap, 6.57%. The total money supply of Bitcoin, 19,761,755 BTC. The percentage issued, 94.1%. In the grand scheme of things, we are just getting started. Anyways, during the numbers segment and during the news segment, we're going to focus on two themes that we've been talking about throughout Simply Bitcoin's history. And it is the separation of not only money and state, but also information and state. So let's get to it. Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to tell you something that is a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people. Fiat elections matter somewhat. Specifically, if you want to stay in your jurisdiction. Bitcoin gives you not only the power to vote with your wallet, but it also gives you the power to vote with your feet. So you could always just say, F you, I'm moving to El Salvador, I'm moving to Freedom Country, I'm moving to a more favorable jurisdiction. However, if you do want to stay in your jurisdiction, fiat elections do matter. Not for the success of the Bitcoin network, but for Bitcoin entrepreneurs and Bitcoin businesses to flourish in that specific jurisdiction. I want to say that first. Second part, first part I'm going to cover, second part, but the first part I'm going to cover on today's numbers section, which is the disintermediation of information. This is where we are today. To put it simply, governments were not prepared for social media. We played you a clip of John Kerry, which was the former Secretary of State earlier on in the week. We're going to replay that clip for you guys today because it is very important in regards to a clip that we're going to play you on later. Let's check out what he has to say in regards to social media and people doing their own research. Let's check it out.
So tough. Everybody's wrestling with that right now. And I think the dislike of and anguish over social media is just growing and growing and growing. And it's part of our problem, particularly in democracies, in terms of building consensus around any issue. It's really hard to govern today. You can't, there's no, the referees we used to have to determine what's a fact and what isn't a fact have kind of, been eviscerated to a certain degree. And people go, and then people self-select where they go for their news or for their information. And then you just get into a vicious cycle. So it's really, really hard, much harder to build consensus today than at any time in the 45, 50 years I've been involved in this. And there's a lot of discussion now about how you curb those entities in order to guarantee that you're going to have, some accountability on facts, et cetera. But look, if people go to only one source and the source they go to is sick and, has an agenda and they're putting out disinformation, our First Amendment stands as a major block to the ability to be able to just, hammer it out of existence. So what we need is to win the ground, win the right to govern by hopefully having, winning enough votes that you're free to be able to implement change.
So let me translate this to you, right? So because we can't co-opt social media, right? Because remember, he said that this has never happened before in the 50 years that he has been doing this. What used to happen was that there was literally a handful of legacy media outlets, whether that was TV networks or, you know, these newspapers. And it was very easy to co-opt the narrative, to control the narrative, right? The problem with social media is now you have mass scale peer-to-peer communications. And now people can build their own platforms without going through the gatekeepers of information. And towards the end, what he basically said was, if we win this election, you know, we will have the ability to essentially go after the First Amendment, and we will be able to go after certain social media platforms. The one that is the most pain in the ass is, of course, X. Since Elon Musk took it over, he's been more pro free speech, and that has resulted from many judicial attacks. The latest one coming out of Brazil, where they just banned the platform outright. In Venezuela, they banned it outright as well. Free speech, apparently, for certain governments is a problem, to the point that even the former Secretary of State of the United States, basically caught in 4K, is saying that the First Amendment is a problem. So the First Amendment in the Constitution is a problem to John Kerry. That's a very, very slippery slope. But we have to remember that this isn't just happening in the United States. This is happening worldwide. It's happening in Europe. It's happening in Australia. In Australia, they proposed a misinformation bill. And it goes on to say, Australia's Communication Legislative Amendment Bill 2024 continues to ignite heated debate, with critics arguing that the bill risks stifling free speech. The proposed bill, which targets misinformation related to elections, public health, and critical infrastructure, requires tech companies to establish codes of conduct. That is what John Kerry is referring to. The problem, ladies and gentlemen, that I'm going to pass on to you guys is who gets to determine what is misinformation and what is information. That's the problem. Because as we've seen over the last 5 years, governments have abused this word of misinformation to censor information that turned out to be true. Because we are a Bitcoin show, we're not going to talk about a lot of the other rhetoric, but I'm going to remind you guys of the fact that they were denying that inflation was going to happen for like a year or 2 years, while Bitcoiners were screaming about it on Twitter. They called us psychopaths. They said what we were. Fast forward 2 years later, they said, oh, we got it wrong. We're sorry. So again, it's a very slippery slope when the government is the only one who is able to get to decide what is the truth and what is not the truth, which is why the First Amendment was established in the first place, because the founding fathers realized this and they knew this from very early on, which is why it's set up the way it was. Now, why am I bringing this up? Why did I play you the Kerry video? Well, I'm going to bring it to yesterday night's debate, the vice presidential debate between Tim Walz, which is a Democratic candidate, and J.D. Vance, which is the Republican candidate. Now, here is Russell Brand. Russell Brand made an appearance at the Bitcoin conference, and I think he brings up a really good point. The threat to democracy is censorship, and I completely agree. But for people like John Kerry, for people that believe that essentially they know what's best for you, even if it's not the truth, they are the ultimate deciders on what is true and what is not true. They don't see censorship the way that we see censorship. They don't see truth the way that we see truth. They see truth as a way of being able to control the narrative, the policy, and unfortunately, when you have free speech platforms like Rumble, protocols like Nostr, and Twitter, it becomes very difficult for them to sell the public on certain narratives. And the reason that this is so important, and we talk about this during a Bitcoin show, is because, ladies and gentlemen, I'm telling you, their weak point, the point that they're not going to be able to defend, is very simple. Why should money have to steal from me in order to function? Why am I being forced to use a money that is designed to lose purchasing power? And now that Bitcoin exists, And because of its decentralization, they can't make it go away. They're going to have to compete with it. And I'm telling you, they're never going to be able to compete with a censorship resistant deflationary money. So their only hopes is to be able to control the narrative. And by the way, I'm not the first person to recognize this. I reference this article so many times. It was written by the president of El Salvador that just made a historic speech at the United Nations. And just to kind of give you an idea of how important controlling the narrative is, this is an article that he wrote after he made Bitcoin legal tender in El Salvador. And I'll read you some of it. He said, the most vocal detractors, the ones who are afraid and pressuring us to reverse our decision, are the world's most powerful elites and the people who work for or benefit from them. And they're willing to fight, lie, smear, destroy, censor, confiscate, print, and do whatever it takes to maintain and increase their control over the truth and everything and everyone. So that's what it fundamentally boils down to. The internet has disintermediated information, and governments who have been used to operating with a total monopoly are not accustomed to that, right? It becomes kind of like this forcing function. Anyways, I want to play you guys a clip from yesterday's debate because I think it's incredibly important, especially if you care about democracy.
I believe that we actually do have a threat to democracy in this country, but unfortunately, it's not the threat to democracy that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz want to talk about. It is the threat of censorship. It's Americans casting aside lifelong friendships because of disagreements over politics. It's big technology companies silencing their fellow citizens. And it's Kamala Harris saying that rather than debate and persuade her fellow Americans, she'd like to censor people who engage in misinformation. I think that is a much bigger threat to democracy than anything that we've seen in this country in the last 4 years, in the last 40 years. Now, I'm really proud, especially given that I was raised by two lifelong blue-collar Democrats, to have the endorsement of Bobby Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, lifelong leaders in the Democratic coalition. And of course, they don't agree with me and Donald Trump on every issue. We don't have to agree on every issue, but we're united behind a basic American First Amendment principle that we ought to debate our differences. We ought to argue about them. We ought to try to persuade our fellow Americans. Kamala Harris is engaged in censorship at an industrial scale. She did it during COVID. She's done it over a number of other issues. And that, to me, is a much bigger threat to democracy than what Donald Trump said when he said that protesters should peacefully protest on January the 6th.
So I'm going to leave it at there, ladies and gentlemen, and just play you guys a clip of course, Tim Walz talking about this. Here we go.
I think we need to push back on this. There's no guarantee to free speech on misinformation or hate speech, and especially around our democracy. I think we need to push back on this. There's no guarantee to free speech on misinformation or hate speech, and especially around our.
There is a guarantee, and that guarantee is like it, as you know, as open as it could be. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. It's not open to interpretation. Like, it is clear as day. And, unfortunately, we are sliding to a certain direction. And I'm telling you why that is, guys. Like, the reason is simple. They used to be able to control the narrative in mass scale. They used to be able to control the legacy media outlets in a way you could still make the case they still do. They used to be able to control the newspapers in an argument you could say that they still do. Social media came along, the internet came along, and it changed the dynamics of everything. And they're scrambling. They don't say, okay, now we just have to talk about these things. No. They would rather censor that information out of existence. Anyways, Opti, what are your thoughts on this? I think this is really important, man, because if they're not going to be okay with us speaking freely, what makes you think they're going to be okay with us transacting freely?
Yeah, no, that's usually the conversation that we have here. Obviously, a lot of people, when we go down these rabbit holes of misinformation or disinformation or freedom of speech, we always get the same question of like, what does this have to do with Bitcoin? And it's like you just said. It's been shown in court that money facilitates speech. We would argue that Bitcoin is just code. It's literally just words and ones and zeros. It's speech. It's very clearly speech, and thus it would fall under the First Amendment, at least in the U.S. Obviously, other jurisdictions don't have the Constitution like us here. But as an American and an American-centric thinker over here, everything flows downhill from America here, and everyone, I think personally, this is obviously my biased take, would like to have the same protections that we have with the Constitution. And thus, this is why we think freedom of speech is so important, because money, in very clear terms in Bitcoin, is speech. Money facilitates speech. And if they are fighting so hard for the control of information, what do you think? Like, we asked the same question. What makes you think they're going to have us transact freely? Because if money starts flowing where people actually want it to go, then things are going to fundamentally change. And this is why they're not only clamping down on speech, but they're also clamping down on our money and our transactions. Hence why we always bring up CBDCs, which are going to very clearly censor and stop money going where it wants to go. Money flows where it wants to flow. And if we are all corralled into a CBDC, not only can it be censored, not only can you be debanked, but there's going to be time limits, so that money won't actually flow where it needs to flow. This is why we are free market capitalists. But again, we bring it up all the time. Remember Nayib Bukele's article in the Bitcoin magazine, Do Not Drink the Elite's Kool-Aid. And in it, he very clearly says that the main tool that the powers that be have is the manipulation, or rather the manufactured consent of narrative. And we've all seen the different clips and the collages of corporate press saying the same thing. It's almost like they are getting the same narrative and the same text and the same script, and then they all go out and parade it like this is, people coming to the same conclusion, when in reality, it's top-down control of the narrative, and this is how things work. They have to manufacture consent. And remember, again, I bring this up all the time, remember what fiat literally means. It means by decree. And so the powers that be have to control information. They have to control, quote unquote, the truth, because the consent of every single one of us, so every single one of us believing that these institutions have legitimacy, is what keeps the fiat system going. As long as we believe the lies, then the system is going to continue to go. And remember, literally our money right now is pretty much monetized words. We have to believe the government. We have to believe in their word that their debt is good. And remember what it says on dollars now, backed by the full faith and credit of the Federal Reserve. These are Federal Reserve notes. It's literally words. Our money is words. It's paper words right now. And this is how the system works. They have to propagate their quote unquote truth. And I would argue their lies, but they have to continue to propagate this so that the majority of people believe in this stuff. And as long as people believe in this, then it's going to continue to go. This is why they're so afraid of all of us communicating on social media. This is why you're seeing the pushback from the powers that be on Elon Musk and him, quote unquote, freeing the bird. And not only that, there's so many different examples. Like Zuck just came out and said that he was censoring during 2020. And it was interesting in the debate where Tim Walz was like, the Harris-Biden administration doesn't censor anything. I don't own Facebook. When the facts point to the complete opposite, that the Harris-Biden administration was telling Zuck to censor information. We have the latest thing of Gavin Newsom basically trying to stop political AI satire because of misinformation. We have the quote of Tim Walz saying like misinformation is dangerous and we have to control it. What is happening now is the narrative is collapsing and people are waking up. And with that comes, yes, some kind of social turmoil, because we are birthing a new world. But with that comes the fact that we can all understand what's going on in the world. And yes, part of free speech means that the idiots have to speak and that we can all get to the bottom and get to consensus of what's actually going on in the world. And with that will come the fact that the money will flow where people's thoughts and behaviors and ideologies goes. This is why we think money is speech. This is why we think it's backed by the First Amendment. But hey, We know the powers that be do not want us to communicate freely because we're going to expose their lies, constantly expose their lies, or like community notes on Twitter. They get exposed all the time. They are lying to you, very bluntly lying to you, and they're spitting in your face.
And they're upset that social media, right, gives you the ability to speak back. Like, that's what it boils down to. And I know what you guys are thinking, because we're getting a lot of comments in regards to this. But remember, guys, this is simply Bitcoin. Tomorrow's Bitcoin news today, guys, I'm telling you, the front line for the battle of Bitcoin in the United States, specifically for the industry, is the battle for free speech. And I'm not the only one to think this. Ross Stevens of NYDIG wrote a report, which we went over for you guys, called Bitcoin's Protection Under the First Amendment. Why is he doing that? Well, he's trying to get ahead. He's trying to set a legal precedent, because make no mistake, there's an operation going on right now called Operation Chokepoint 2.0, which we're going to get into more details during the news segment for more updates for you guys, that there's a effort by elements of the US government which are trying to isolate the industry from the rest of the traditional financial system, in the hopes that, number one, you are funneled towards the ETFs. Number two, you don't take self-custody. They came up with terms like an unhosted wallets to make it seem like somehow when you take self-custody, that isn't the norm, right? It's an unhosted wallet, right? Unhosted wallet was never mentioned in the Bitcoin white paper. That is an invention from government regulators. Anyways, here's the overview of this paper. It says, in recent years, Bitcoin has faced growing resistance from the very governmental authorities that Bitcoin advocates seek to deprive of their monetary monopolies. In taking such steps, regulators do not appear to have considered the First Amendment implications of targeting Bitcoin. They should. This paper argues through extensive legal precedent that Bitcoin is speech and is therefore protected by the First Amendment. Any regulators attempting to curtail Bitcoin, therefore, have clear constitutional implications. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is why we bring up these videos, because these are members of the US government literally admitting that the First Amendment is a problem, right? So again, if we don't hold the line here, I'm telling you, it's going to be very, very, very hairy for us from a regulatory standpoint 5 years from now for the Bitcoin industry in the United States. Anyways, guys, stay tuned. We're going to get into more details about Operation Chokepoint 2.0. We just talked about the disintermediation of information, and now we're about to talk about the disintermediation of money and state. Let's check it out. Here we go.
Very special shout out to our sponsor, Compass Mining. They make Bitcoin mining accessible to everyone, from beginners to experienced investors. Their turnkey miners gets you online and hashing within 48 hours, making it easier than ever to start your mining journey. Plus, with their active marketplace, you can resell your miner at any time, adding flexibility and value to your investment. Visit their website to access a wealth of resources, learning everything you need to know about Bitcoin mining. Take your first step into the world of Bitcoin mining with confidence. Discover more at compassmining.io. Again, compassmining.io, and see how Compass Mining can power your success. I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Foundation. It's self-custody done right. They built a premium grade hardware wallet called Passport right here in the US, and it integrates seamlessly with their free app called Envoy. Passport is fully open source and verifiable. It's the most intuitive Bitcoin wallet design with a UX reminiscent of a classic feature phone, so you'll know how to navigate it and use it the moment you pick it up. It's also air-gapped, meaning Bitcoin stays offline, never touching an internet connection. It's Bitcoin only, open source verifiable, air-gap security model, gorgeous design craft, premium grade materials. Get your Bitcoin off exchanges and into your own hands in just a few minutes with Passport at foundation.xyz/simply. Get peace of mind for your piece of Bitcoin.
All right, everybody, before we jump into the news, Opti is going to model for you guys the Passport by Foundation devices. Guys, remember, not your keys, not your cheese. It's incredibly easy to use. It literally, it's like, this is the perfect gift to give to someone who doesn't take self-custody. Perhaps they feel a little bit intimidated by the technology. You give them a Passport hardware wallet. They get all the benefits of cold storage Bitcoin. It's completely air-gapped, but also the convenience of being able to take self-custody without jumping through all the hoops. They also offer a concierge service on their website, by the way, so that they can literally help you set up your own cold storage. Use promo code SIMPLY to get a small discount, but it doesn't come with Opti. That's up for negotiation. Message the Simply Bitcoin handle and we'll talk about it. Anyways, one Bitcoin. Okay, so update for you guys on Operation Chokepoint 2.0. Again, two themes of today's episode, which I want to focus on, guys. Very, very important. The disintermediation of information. And theme number 2, the disintermediation of money. This is coming. This isn't happening yet. We're like in the first innings of this fight. And we're going to give you an update of what is happening so far. So Nick Carter originally wrote an excellent piece called Operation Chokepoint 2.0. In fact, it became so popular that it was actually mentioned by Congressman Warren Davidson in congressional testimony. Nick Carter made a very, very good case. In fact, the article is extremely long and very thorough, making a case that elements of the Biden administration, which are now potentially the Harris administration, attempted to destroy crypto-friendly banks. And they did it for political reasons. They didn't do it because those banks are going to go under themselves. So we're going to read through some of the bullet points. Obviously, we don't have enough time to go through the entire article. However, I will put it for you guys in the chat. Put it right there. Bada bing, bada boom. But let's read through some of the key points and also the new information. So the new information suggests that the Biden administration regulators deliberately killed off crypto-friendly Silvergate in an attempt to I can't say that on YouTube, in an attempt to stop the US crypto industry. Let's read through some of the bullet points. New bankruptcy filings and exclusive interviews with confidential sources suggest Silvergate could have survived if not for pressure from regulators, which allegedly included an informal mandate to cap its crypto deposits at 15%. Senator Elizabeth Warren all but accused Silvergate of aiding and abetting FTX crimes, creating an, quote, atmosphere of concern around Silvergate that possibly contributed to a run on the bank. Sources told us that the FHLB, which stands for the Federal Home Loan Banks, refused to renew their monthly loan agreement with Silvergate due to political pressure from Warren, accelerating the bank's losses. Claims of criminal wrongdoing related to Silvergate's association with FTX have never been proven, and no criminal charges have ever been filed against the bank. Silvergate's downfall may have been a primary cause of the 2023 regional banking crisis, which ultimately took down Signature, Silicon Valley Bank, and First Republic. That is damning. That is crazy. So essentially, let's break it down real quick. Let's simplify it. Elizabeth Warren and members of the US government purposely took advantage of a crisis, which was FTX, to get rid of a crypto-friendly bank. And I know what some of you guys are thinking. Maybe you're like, Nico, this is an isolated incident. Like, what are you talking about? Like this? No. Maybe all of these things, they could potentially be coincidences, okay? The problem is that there's a pattern here. It isn't just Silvergate Bank. Here is a tweet from Tyler Winklevi. Tyler Winklevi and his brother, Cameron Winklevi, are the founders of the Gemini Exchange. Gemini Exchange is very popular in the United States. This is what Tyler Winklevi said. Today, and when he originally posted this, I believe it was, I'll get you guys the date in a second, but this was about a month or two or so. Today, the Fed confirmed that Operation Chokepoint 2.0 remains in full swing, provided valuable insight into how it works, and verified that the Harris crypto reset is a scam. The Fed revealed that all of this in a 13-page enforcement action it issued this morning against crypto-friendly bank Customers Bank. The punchline of this enforcement action is that Customers Bank must now give the Fed 30 days of advance notice prior to entering into any new banking relationship with a crypto company. Of course, the only way you can understand this is by connecting the third paragraph on page 1 of the order with the last paragraph on page 9. So here's the first page. Whereas Bancorp has pursued a business strategy that involves offering banking services to digital asset customers. This is the notification. Effective immediately, the organization shall provide the Reserve Bank with written notice 30 days prior to engaging in any strategic initiative, product, or service relationship with third parties related to digital assets. Given that Customers Bank is one of the only few remaining crypto-friendly banks remaining in America today, and again, I want you guys to connect the dots, right? So they basically destroyed two crypto-friendly banks. And one of the last remaining crypto-friendly banks, they did this a couple months after. Now, guys, you can't say this is a coincidence at this point. This is an effort by elements of the current administration to essentially isolate the industry from the traditional financial system. I think it scares them to death that Michael Saylor's Bitcoin strategy is as successful as it is. And I think it scares them to death that people now have, to use BlackRock's own words, an alternative non-sovereign monetary system. I think that's what it boils down to fundamentally. Anyways, getting back to Tyler's thread. Given that Customers Bank is one of the only few crypto-friendly banks remaining in America today, this means that the Fed is now a direct gatekeeper. Remember that word, gatekeeper? I used it as it relates to information, right? Gatekeepers have been incredibly important for governments to be able to control information and money, right? There's only a handful of custodians that governments use basically as a third arm enforcement deputy, essentially acting on behalf of the government to enforce their laws, right? The problem comes when now you have peer-to-peer communications and peer-to-peer money. There is no gatekeeper to put pressure on, and that's essentially what the book The Sovereign Individual makes the case for when they say we are transitioning from the analog age to the information age. This is why in The Sovereign Individual, they say the governments see their citizens as tax cattle, but essentially information technologies is now going to give those tax cattle wings. That's why they make the case. This is what it's all about. You're witnessing it happening in full time and will be your guide through this whole chaotic process. Anyways, it continues to say, this is not how principles-based regulation is supposed to work. The decision whether to bank a company should be decentralized across the entire banking industry and made by each bank at its own discretion. Now this decision has been centralized by the Fed and will be made by the Fed at its sole discretion. The choke point has been created. What exactly did Customers Bank do to earn this regulatory straitjacket and be forced to abdicate its own business judgment and decision-making to the Fed with respect to banking crypto companies? That part is entirely unclear. The non-allegation allegations are so hand-wavy and vague, they would make Franz Kafka blush. All we know from the 13-page order is that during the most recent examination and inspection, the Fed, quote, identified significant deficiencies, not a single fact or tangible finding. However, it is provided to back up this claim. The public must take the Fed's word for it. Trust us, they say. How convenient, right? Don't trust, verify. No. It's like, just trust us, bro. Misinformation? No, you're just trust us, bro. We know what's best. This is not, and I'm going to use their words, this is not how a democracy should be run. The Fed is an unelected, the Jerome Powell is not elected. He's appointed. He's appointed. He's not democratically elected. He's appointed. So who is holding these unelected bureaucrats accountable? And why should they have the power to get to decide what bank should be able to bank the digital assets industry and what bank shouldn't be able to bank the digital assets industry. They're trying to create a choke point. It's clear as day. And all you got to do is you put the pieces together. The first hit job on Silvergate, which was successful, those banks went down. And now the regulatory hit job on Customers Bank, which conveniently happens to be one of the last crypto-friendly banks in the United States. And then this leads me to one of the points that I was making at the beginning of the show. And unfortunately, and a lot of Bitcoiners are going to take this the wrong way, which is fiat elections matter. Unfortunately, that's the reality of this, guys. Fiat elections matter. And the 2024 election, whether it's information or whether it's the regulatory policy towards the industry in the United States, it will have implications for the next 4 years. What you're getting from one party is pro-Bitcoin, anti-CBDC policy. And what you're getting from the other party is anti-Bitcoin and pro-CBDC policy. And what I believe this fundamentally comes down to is they want to create a monopoly for the central bank digital currency to flourish. Because without a monopoly, a central bank digital currency will never win in a free market fight with Bitcoin. Why? A central bank digital currency is always going to be inflationary. 2, a central bank digital currency will always be prone to censorship. If you compare and contrast that with Bitcoin, Bitcoin is censorship resistant and Bitcoin is deflationary. So instead of allowing different currencies to compete, they want to shut down the competition. They want to create a monopoly. And doesn't that sound familiar with the censorship industry? It's the same thing. We don't want you to do your critical thinking. We don't want you to do your own research. We want to get to determine what is the truth and what is not the truth. And this is what it boils down to. These are the two options in front of us, right? And especially, me and Opti are first generation Americans, and we've been sold on what America, the dream of America, what America should be, right? And I'm telling you, this is not at all what America should be. This is not at all fair competition. These are bureaucrats getting to decide, what money should be allowed and what money shouldn't be allowed. And I think that is definitely a shame, to say the least. Anyways, Opti, what's your take on all this?
Yeah, well, I think I got to run out after today. We've been covering this for a long time. And is this surprising? No, we've been covering it. We've been trying to give the benefit of the doubt. Obviously, we don't want to speculate on people's intentions and stuff. And we could only really follow the paper trail.
I mean, bro.
No, I know. I was talking in the past. We were trying to give the benefit of the doubt. We're not mind readers here, but the paper trail that came out all of this year was proving to us that there was an active attack on the Bitcoin industry. And now at the very end of the year, it all became a fact as far as, anyone that is looking is concerned, that the powers that be want to stop Bitcoin. The Chokepoint 2.0 is real. I remember in the beginning of the year, everyone was saying not everyone, but non-Bitcoiners were saying, and people in power Chokepoint 2.0 isn't a real thing. Well, remember even Gary Gensler said in that video that, I've never even heard about this Chokepoint 2.0 thing. And now very clear as day, it's been proven that this was an active attack on Bitcoin. Obviously, we've been saying for a long time that the on and off ramps are a very clear attack vector in regards to Bitcoin. And this is them trying to stop the adoption of Bitcoin. And we say it all the time. You can't ban Bitcoin. You can only ban yourself from Bitcoin. And Bitcoin has a way of exposing people's incentives. And now it's become very clear that the powers that be are terrified of Bitcoin, because if they weren't terrified of Bitcoin, they wouldn't be actively trying to shoot Bitcoin in the kneecaps, metaphorically, of course. And here we are at the end of the year proving that they've been trying to stop the attack on, or the adoption of Bitcoin, by attacking the on and off ramps, by basically, unaliving banks out here and taking taking them down and look and trying to make it seem like Bitcoin or even, you know, the shitcoin industry is risky and it's not somewhere you want to put your money. And so am I surprised that the Cantillon insiders, those that are afraid of competition, those that have a monopoly on the banking system are trying to stop Bitcoin adoption? It's like, no, this is the reason for Bitcoin in the first place. Like, they should be afraid of Bitcoin because Bitcoin does take away their power. And if you're being honest with yourself, if you were in their position, you'd probably do the same thing. But we're not part of the club. Hence why we're Bitcoiners. Hence why we want a money that is controlled by the people for the people and doesn't have a small cabal of people that control it and take seigniorage off of it. This is the whole thing about Bitcoin, is like they can't control it. Yes, there's attempts to control it, whether it's on and off ramps, whether it's KYC, AML regulations. We know the attack vectors. And I still think this is early in the then they fight you stage because we haven't seen an outright public attack on Bitcoin. They haven't said, well, that we've seen the inklings of it, not from officials yet, but saying that Bitcoin is a threat to democracy yet. We're going to get there soon enough. I'm sure Bitcoiners are going to be painted as actual criminals and actual lepers of society, when in reality, all we want is a money that they can't steal from us and a money that's outside of their control. And if you were in their position, you probably would paint the opposition as criminals as well, because I'm not one of these Bitcoiners that thinks that, oh, the powers that be, the economic elite, the unproductive class, whatever you want to call it, they don't understand Bitcoin. Now, on one hand, they may not understand Bitcoin like we understand Bitcoin on a technical level, but they understand the game that's being played and what they have to lose if Bitcoin does succeed. Hence why we see examples of this and we'll continue to see examples of this. So are we surprised? No, we've been covering this for a long time, but it is very good proof that they want to stop Bitcoin adoption, because now we have the hard, cold facts proving that they were trying to stop the adoption of Bitcoin via taking out Bitcoin banks.
100%. And I'll do one last thing for you guys, ladies and gentlemen, to do the final connecting the dots for you guys, because we started the show, the theme of the show, with the disintermediation of money and the disintermediation of information. Now, ladies and gentlemen, they're one in the same. The battle is one in the same. The fight for free speech is the fight for Bitcoin. This is why Ross Stevens wrote this paper called Bitcoin's Protection Under the First Amendment. And what he's trying to do is he's trying to get ahead on a legal level, because if you're paying attention to what is happening in the background, check out this latest news. Gensler to rule on SEC licensing requirements for communication protocols. SEC Chair Gary Gensler expressed intent to rule amendments to Rule 3B16 of the Exchange Act by November, criticized as overly broad. The proposed amendments may be abused to require software publishers to obtain SEC licenses. That's right. They even want to make you get a license to communicate, right? You see where this is going, and you see why the First Amendment is so important, and you see why John Kerry is saying the things that he's saying about the First Amendment, right? You control speech, you control people, you control speech, you control money. That's what it boils down to. All right, everybody, let's get to the culture. We have a lot to talk about. Let's check it out. Here we go. All right, everybody, I want to tell you guys about our sponsor, the Orange Collapse. Stack friends who stack sats. Join the 12,233 Bitcoiners that are currently on the Orange Collapse. To get started, all you got to do is you scan the QR code on your screen. It will take you directly to the App Store on Android or Apple, and you'll be able to download the app. The Orange Pill app is the #1 resource for Bitcoin-only events. It's also a great resource to connect with Bitcoiners that are near you. It has a really clever geographical feature, so it will show you the Bitcoiners that are around you, and it will give you the ability to send them a message. It also has a very clever filtration system, so you'll only find fellow Bitcoiners on the app. It's also one of the best ways to reach me directly. So to get started, scan the QR code or check the link in the video description or podcast description. Download the Orange Pill app today. the Bitcoin social layer. All right, I'm going to pass it on to Opti. I don't even know what we're going to talk about during the culture segment today, but I'm excited. Opti, what do you have lined up for us?
Before I get into that, it looks like we're under a shitcoin spam attack right now in the chats and the comments. So at this point, guys, do not fall for the scams. It's Bitcoin only. This is the way. Okay, actually, let's go back here. So yesterday, obviously, we had kind of had like a doomer episode. Things got a little spicy and things got a little crazy. And of course, we things are happening in the world right now that as Bitcoiners, we fundamentally disagree with. I think Bitcoiners are very much anti-war and we are pro-peace. And yesterday's show got a little doomy. And there was a comment that basically said something on the lines of, oh, there's a war happening and these idiots are talking about Bitcoin. And we kind of touched on it yesterday, but it's a very tried and true meme in the Bitcoin world where fiat is the money of endless wars and Bitcoin is the money of peace. Bitcoin is the money of the people. And Bitcoin is a money about cooperation and about entering into a better world, one where we're not forced to use a money that steals from us, ones where we're not coerced to use a money that steals from us, one that isn't endlessly printed to facilitate all of these endless wars in the world, a money that is more aligned with the behaviors and the ideas and people's perspectives on what they value in the world, aka Bitcoin, a free market money, hard cap, censorship resistant, permissionless, unconfiscatable, all those good things. And so I kind of want to dive down into the idea of Bitcoin versus fiat, of a money of war versus a money of freedom. And so on that note, shouts out to my boy CJ. Highly recommend you follow him on Twitter at CJ Constantinos. Probably butchered your name. Sorry, bro. But he is also jumping on this idea. There's some article here from CoinDesk that said a flare up in the Middle East tensions appeared to be behind a quick drop in the price of crypto prices early during the U.S. trading session on Tuesday. CJ kind of does what we do here on the show. You know, the fact that people are selling off Bitcoin because of a potential war when the only way to pay for war is printing money into infinity just shows how much the marketplace doesn't understand the value proposition of Bitcoin. Few understand Bitcoin as a commodity and fewer understand Bitcoin as engineered money. And on that note, there's a lot of people that FUD Bitcoin and say the classic trope of, oh, Bitcoin is backed by nothing. And, you know, like that's why you don't need Bitcoin. And us Bitcoiners flip it on its head. And this has been pinned on our YouTube profile. So if you've seen this, you've watched our stuff on YouTube. This is the difference between, what do we call this? Mining Bitcoin versus mining the US dollar. Great propaganda there, Nico. Defund war, join the peaceful revolution, Bitcoiner slavery, opt out, buy some Bitcoin. This is the way. This is what we talk about when we talk about orange versus green, fiat money versus Bitcoin, Bitcoiner slavery, fiat, the perpetuation of fiat money, money that they can literally print out of thin air is what causes these endless wars. And if I'm remembering correctly, it was Ron Paul that said, it is no coincidence that the last century is the bloodiest century, the fiat century.
The century of central banking is the bloodiest century.
There we go. Love it, Nico. And so, you know, going back to my favorite search browser right now, perplexity.ai, I just did a little search here. And even though the results weren't conclusive here, you can see how fiat money, how the printing of money does back wars. And I'm sure there's endless examples to do this, but I just searched on Perplexity, how much money has been printed for war? And the answer, the printing of money to finance wars has been a significant historical practice, though the exact amounts vary widely depending on the conflict and time period. Here are some key points about money printing for war effort. We have World War II. World War II saw a massive increase in money supply across many countries. In the U.S., military expenditures rose dramatically from a few $100 million per year before the war to $85 billion in 1943 and $91 billion in 1944. To finance this, the Federal Reserve worked closely with the Treasury to issue war bonds and expand the money supply significantly. And in other major conflicts during the American Civil War, both the Union and Confederate sides printed large amount of currency to finance their war efforts. In World War I, Germany abandoned the gold gold standard and rapidly increased its money supply, leading to hyperinflation in the early 1920s. And then in recent times, it brings in the pandemic printing. So historical tactics. Interestingly, countries have sometimes attempted to print and distribute counterfeit versions of enemy currencies as a form of economic war. During World War II, Nazi Germany engaged in Operation Bernard to produce counterfeit British pounds. The UK reportedly printed counterfeit French assignats during the wars following the French Revolution. It's important to note that modern monetary systems are far more complex, with most money existing digitally rather than as physical currency. This makes large-scale physical money printing for war financing less relevant in contemporary conflict because they can literally just digitally change the ledger. This is why we say Bitcoin versus slavery. This is why we say that CBDCs will be very easy to inflate. They literally just change a digital ledger over there. And anyways, on that note, not only is money printed to facilitate endless wars, but this fact, this stat that came out this year, a couple months ago now, is just absolutely crazy, because not only do we print money for wars, but now our interest costs on our national debt in the U.S. surpasses the defense spending and Medicare. These probably need to be updated here, but at the time it was $515 billion paying back in interest and $498 billion in national defense. So now not only are we just printing money for wars, but the interest on our national debt surpasses all the money we print in wars, which is why we always tell you guys that there is no escape out of this. They have to print money, and that means you are going to get poorer. And as I was looking up for the data, of course, I'm going to come over to the usdebtclock.org. It's one of my favorite sites. You can see the national debt is getting closer to $36 trillion. And Nico brought this up yesterday. The U.S. federal tax revenue is at $4.9 trillion. The U.S. federal spending is at $6.9 trillion. But you can see here, the defense war, and it's showing you in real time how much we're spending on defense, which is what, 100,000 million, 931 billion, and the interest on the debt is 957 billion. Guys, there's no way out of this. They have to print money. Fiat not only is the money of war, but it's also the money that keeps you poor, destitute, and in the rat race. And this is why we're Bitcoiners, because Bitcoin is the alternative. But I hear you guys saying, oh, but there's geopolitical things going on in the world, and Bitcoin reacted badly to it. It dropped. Why isn't Bitcoin pumping? So shouts out to my boy Ansel Lindner on Twitter. And he goes, we heard the geopolitical FUD against Bitcoin just last year. And here's a chart. Bitcoin is a geopolitical hedge because it does its own thing. And you can see here in October of 2023, claim proof that Bitcoin is not a political hedge, geopolitical hedge. It dropped for a little bit. And ever since then, it's been pumping and going up into the right because it's going up forever. And again, we're at the same point in time. It's not that history repeats, it's that it rhymes. We're hearing people say the same thing, that Bitcoin is not a geopolitical hedge because it dropped. I would just argue that Bitcoin is the most liquid market in the world. It's the only free market left in the world. And this is why it reacts how it reacts. And thus, this is why we constantly tell you guys on the show that it's not left versus right. It's not Democrat versus Republican. It is orange versus green. Nico, I think this is the point where you come in. What do we always say? Green is the party of nihilism, pessimism, and war. And orange, aka Bitcoin, is the side of
peace, prosperity, opportunity,
freedom. Hope. Bitcoin is the real opportunity economy, to steal a framing from.
Oh man, yeah,
Bitcoin is cooperation. Like, people to transact in the Bitcoin economy, you have to be incentivized to get rid of your money, versus the opposite in the fiat world, where they will force you with coercion, with guns, to put you into a cage, to take away your money, and or via inflation to take away your wealth. This is why we're Bitcoiners, so that you can save and hold on to the work and the value that you produce and put into the world. And hopefully in the future, if you are smart, can live a prosperous, free, and peaceful life on the Bitcoin standard.
Amen to that. Amen to that. By the way, shout out to the almost 2,000 live viewers between YouTube and YouTube and X. And also shout out to the 100 of you guys watching on Rumble. And of course, shout out to the Nostr crowd, the 15 of you guys watching us on Nostr that zapped us almost 1,000 sats today. Really appreciate it, guys. But yeah, I mean, look, fiat is the money of war. Bitcoin is the money of peace. It's as simple as that. Let's defund war. Let's defund the war machine. And to do that, we got to separate money from state. I think Opti made so many great examples there with different governments, and they always do the same thing. When they want to fund wars, they get off the gold standard, they get off a sound money standard, they start debasing the currency at the expense of their citizens. Like, it's as simple as that. If you don't have a money printer, eventually what happens? You run out of money to pay for the tanks. You run out of money to pay for the ammunition. I don't think anyone should have the godlike power of being able to create money for free. I think that power is immense. That power leads to devastation. That power leads to travesty. What Bitcoiners are advocating for, and anyone who's against Bitcoin, they're advocating against this, is that no one should have the ability to create money for free that another human being has to work for. That's what Bitcoiners are advocating for. If you want to make more Bitcoin, you have to get in line and mine it like everybody else. There's an expense to make more Bitcoin, right? This whole idea that you can just, a bureaucratic elite, which, by the way, doesn't even want you to speak freely, wants to decide, wants to have the ability, the sole monopoly of the ones to issue money. I think that era is over. We got Shane Hazel in the chat. Let's effing go. Stop the war machine. Buy Bitcoin. It's really as simple as that. Buy Bitcoin, stop the endless wars, separate money from state, separate information from state. This is what the peaceful revolution is all about. Anyways, guys.
Wait, Nico, before we end it, I do want to say UTXO's comment because this is great. So you're telling me they are now paying more to the bankers than the weapons manufacturer. Interesting. We find ourselves in this position right now. It just goes to show the fiat system is absolutely wrecked. And again, I am once again here as a guy going to reference the Roman Empire. We've seen this play out for a long time, that once they start clipping money, that's when the empire starts to crumble. There's countless examples of this throughout history, and we're just in a new phase of this. As long as they can print more money, as long as they can conjure money out of thin air, they are debasing your currency, they're debasing your wealth, and we are destroying ourselves by living on the fiat standard. This is why we are advocates for you guys transferring some of your wealth into Bitcoin. As Shane said, if you don't like war, buy Bitcoin. It's
Amen
literally
that.
that just simple.
Amen to that. All right, ladies and gentlemen, if you guys enjoyed today's show, make sure to smash that like button. Consider subscribing if you feel like we provided you value. But the number one thing you could do to help push this peaceful Bitcoin revolution forward is share this content. In fact, share all Bitcoin content. Get the message out there. It's not left versus right. It's not liberal versus conservative. It's party of green versus party of orange. Obviously, we are on Team Orange. That will make the world a much more peaceful place. Anyways, guys, 3 more likes to 200. So smash the like button if you guys are enjoying the show. There's 2,024 of you guys watching live. We're not going to go off air. We are not going to go off air. We're at 199. One more person, smash the like button if you're watching us on YouTube. 200 likes. All right, everybody. This was Simply Bitcoin Live for October 2nd, 2024. I'm your host, Nico. This is my co-host, Optimus Fields, and we'll see you tomorrow for a brand new episode of Simply Bitcoin Live. Stay tuned for Rustin's Simply Bitcoin Originals, which is dropping later today. Peace out, everybody. Take care.
Brought to you by BitcoinWell.com, a Bitcoin-only platform on a mission to enable financial independence.